Facts about slavery they don't teach you in school. Slavery in America has a long and tumultuous history in America, as most of us are aware. Slaves were mostly brought in from Africa. Slavery was mostly practiced on plantations in Virginia, the Carolinas, and Georgia's coastal colonies. Slavery spread westward when the British colonies were combined into the United States and the country grew westward. However, it is not the end of the narrative. There's still a lot to learn. Before we move on the next step, please subscribe my YouTube channel so that you can be updated by my new videos. Where did slaves come from? Sailing ships transported potential slaves from Africa to the British American colonies in the South, and later, to the southern US states. However, much more African slaves were transported to South America and the Caribbean Sea Islands than to the United States. But, where did all of those African slaves originate from? The crews of European sailing ships did not merely throw men ashore to collect up Africans. Slaves who were destined to be carried into slave ships were sold by other Africans in exchange for goods supplied by the slave ships. Tribes in Africa, like tribes all across the world since the birth of civilization, were, and still are, frequently at odds with one another. Except in rare circumstances where they learn it from others who are more sophisticated, tribes are usually unaware of the concept of agriculture. Tribes must scavenge for any food they can. Other tribes competed for the food and the land it grew on, and they still do. Killing and enslaving members of neighboring tribes was a vital element of life for a tribe before the rule of law, extensive usage of farming, and industrialization. Some tribes would be waiting to sell captured members of other tribes when slave ships arrived on the African coast. On the next visit of a slave ship, the scenario may be reversed, with other tribes selling captured members of the tribes that had previously sold slaves. Slave ships provided tribes with an easy opportunity to diminish the population of neighboring tribes. Slaves transported to slave ships were not the only Africans consigned to a life of servitude. Tribes all over Africa maintained and keep other Africans as slaves, and this practice continues to this day in much of Africa. The African slave trade existed long before the 1600s, when Africans were first shipped to the Americas. The Muslims outnumbered everyone else in terms of the number of people enslaved. Muslims enslaved an estimated 17 million individuals between 650 and 1905. Some were captured during Muslim ship attacks around Europe's shores, as far north as Ireland. Another 1 million people were enslaved in Muslim Ottoman Turkey from Ukraine and Poland. However, Africans made up the lion's share of people enslaved by Muslims, who were compelled to march north over the Sahara Desert, many of whom died in the process, to be sold into slavery by Muslim owners. The other slavery in America. Before Europeans set foot on the New World, slavery had been a part of American history for almost 10,000 years. Slavery was widespread among American Indian tribes, and it lasted until the late 1800s. Tribes have been fighting one another since the dawn of time, slaughtering and enslaving their foes. Slavery is an unavoidable aspect of tribal culture. We all have slave-owning ancestors. While there have been some initiatives to ameliorate slave treatment, to prohibit the importation of slaves in some areas, and even to abolish specific forms of slavery, such as debt slavery, slavery persisted throughout the world until the 1800s, less than 200 years ago. What really ended slavery? Slavery was finally abolished after two linked events kicked off the process. The Enlightenment, often known as the Age of Reason, began about the time John Locke wrote his treatises on individual rights in the 1680 to 1690 timeframe and ended around the time of the American Constitutional Convention in 1787. Individual rights, as a new philosophy, was a first for humanity, as it was the first manifestation of the idea that no one of us should be superior to another. This new and daring idea traveled first through England and her colonies, then more slowly to the rest of Europe, where monarchies reigned supreme. Fearing revolt, such kings did not want such disruptive ideas to be spread to their subject populations. Beyond Europe, the globe was still quite primitive, and the concept of individual rights had not yet made its way into Asia, Africa, or Latin America. It still hasn't made its way into many parts of the world today. Because the Founding Fathers transformed the bold ideals of the Enlightenment into realistic legislation and administration, the United States has been dubbed the child of the Enlightenment. The United States Constitution is founded on the Enlightenment concepts of individual rights. Those values were not, and still aren't, properly applied in the creation of the United States of America's government. The Founding Fathers of America, on the other hand, laid the groundwork for future generations to do what they couldn't. The United States has always been the driving force behind the global extension of individual rights. However, there is still work to be done. Socialism, which is inherently opposed to and destructive of individual rights, is the only doctrine that continues to obstruct the global development of the concept of individual rights. The Industrial Revolution, which began in Britain in the mid-1700s and extended to the United States and continental Europe in the early 1800s, was the second factor that hastened the abolition of slavery. Slavery became economically unviable as a result of the Industrial Revolution, making it simpler to abolish it. In terms of quality, quantity, and cost, mechanization and educated, trained people will always surpass unwilling, rote physical human labor. The growing income gap between the industrially developed northern states and the still agrarian southern states was becoming a significant and divisive issue for the country by the time of the American Civil War. The development of the southern states, on the other hand, has outpaced that of the northern states since the end of slavery and the decline of racism. 30 million people know slavery exists right now. However, slavery has not yet been abolished. Slavery is still practiced in many parts of the world, especially in areas where individual rights and industrialization are limited. Criminal organizations profit from slavery in more civilized countries, such as the United States. Slavery persists throughout equatorial Africa and southern Asia, particularly in India, Pakistan, Burma, Thailand, and Laos. 30 million people are enslaved now. Ask a sports figure or anyone else on bended knee what they are doing about slavery now, and the 30 million people who live in it, in the present, and whether they care more about living human beings than mourning a former practice of humanity. I hope you find this video helpful. If you liked the video, do like and subscribe as it really helps our channel, and do remember to give your feedback in the comments below. See you in the next video with some more interesting stories and facts.